Hello, my name is Andrea, and today I will share a creepy story with you that my boyfriend and I experienced 2 years ago. It happened a week after my 19th birthday. Since I was little, I didn't get the chance to travel much because my parents were extremely busy and not very wealthy. So all I got to see was what our school showed us during school trips. And ever since I saw the movie Tarzan, I had dreamt of going on a safari. And a week after my 19th birthday, my boyfriend, Lucas, whose parents are super rich, surprised me with a trip to one of the biggest safari destinations in the world. His parents were very rich, so he booked us a fancy hotel. We stayed there for 2 days, and we booked a tour there so we can start exploring the beautiful nature. We saw so many animals that I've never thought I would ever see before. Elephants, giraffes, tigers, and colorful parrots, just to name a few. I felt so happy that I'm doing that with the person I love. We held hands and walked around, watched the amazing beauty of nature and the beautiful animals it created. Inside the safari, we booked another hotel. This time, we stayed at a hotel by the river, out in the wild, so that we can keep exploring the next day. We got to ride on elephants and feed them and even pet some tigers. I still can't believe I got the chance to experience that. And by the evening, we took a jeep ride to the desert plains looking for lions when it suddenly stopped. The driver informed us that we had run out of fuel, therefore he has to go back and bring some more. We stayed in the jeep waiting for his return. Lucas was looking so handsome in his safari clothes. As I was looking into his eyes and moving closer to kiss him, I was interrupted by the loudest roar I heard in my life. We both jumped up and saw lions heading towards us. We didn't know how to act since we were not guided well. It was already getting dark, and I hoped that the lions would only pass us by, but pretty soon, the jeep was surrounded with more and more lions appearing with each passing minute. What was so special about us that the lions seemed so eager to have a taste? Lucas grabbed a stick and scared them away with it, but the lions suddenly started turning into hangry monsters. I felt helpless, so I started crying and noticed the strangest of things. Whenever I cried louder, the lions moved away, so I cried as loud as I could. It took us a while to realize that we were all alone and that the guide was not coming back. How far could the fuel possibly be? We decided to jump on the top of the car to hide from the lions and to see everything clearer. And that was when Lucas discovered that there were pieces of meat on the Jeep's roof. Why would a guide risk his life by putting meat on his car? And where the hell was he? Lucas and I started scattering the pieces of raw meat everywhere, throwing them as far as we could to get the lions away from us. Then we ran as fast as we could, worried the lions would follow us because we smelled like blood and raw meat. We ran as far as we could. I never thought I would see a lion so close in the wild. But the trails were dark and we lost our way, surrounded by the sounds of wild animals. Our phones had no service, so we used our flashlights and slowly headed straight, hoping it would get us somewhere safe. It was just after 11 p.m., which meant we had the whole night ahead of us, and no one would notice that we weren't in the hotel room. I couldn't help but cry. Lucas was holding himself together, but I could see how terrified he was. He told me that his parents would sue that tour guide for leaving us like that in the wild. And that's when we heard the gorillas. The leader of the pack was huge. He was walking around guarding his family. If he saw us, he would think we were hunters and a threat to his family. I almost made a sound, but Lucas put his hand over my mouth and told me to be quiet. I was sure this was our last night alive. We walked slowly to make the least amount of sound possible and not let the animals notice us, even though we smelled like raw meat. We kept walking. There were bugs everywhere. Spiders, crickets, and we even saw snakes too. I couldn't wait any longer for all this to end. As we were walking amongst some trees, we saw a man in a green outfit, pointing a gun at us. "Move away from her," he yelled. We walked a little closer, squinting to see his face a little better in the moonlight. I couldn't believe it. It was our driver, the man that had left us in the wild. "Sir, we can sue you, you know. We almost died because of you," I said with fear. "Sir? Really? Have you already forgotten me, Andrea?" he replied. And that's when it hit me. It was the guy who used to be obsessed with me in high school, James. He had confessed his love for me so many times, and each time I had rejected him. I felt shocked. Where had he come from? And why now? "I saw you two lovebirds and realized you belong here in the wild, don't you think?" he said. "Please don't hurt us. What's done is done. You can't still be into me. We haven't seen each other for over 5 years." and then he pointed the gun at Lucas. I whispered to Lucas, "Run and get help quickly." "Lucas, go," I said to him. "I know him. I know how to deal with him. Trust me." Lucas ran away, and before James took a step after him, I blocked his way and told him, "We're all by ourselves now," patting his face with my palm. He looked at me, confused as hell, so I said, "Don't you get it? I made him go away so we could have some privacy. Do you really think I love him? I'm only with him because his parents are super rich." James calmed down and lowered his gun. I walked towards him and took off my shoes. I grabbed my socks and shoes with my hands and asked him to carry me. "You made me run so much from all these animals. My feet hurt like hell. I can't walk anymore." He grabbed me like a princess, and that's when I told him to take me to the most romantic place in the wild. He didn't say anything and just walked, holding me tightly. I put my hands around his neck and told him how manly he was. He smiled, and we headed to the place he was taking me to. Grabbing me in his arms made his footsteps heavier and deeper in the dirt, which will help Lucas to find me, I thought to myself. On our way, I dropped my socks and shoes in every turn we made. And then we arrived to a beautiful, glowy waterfall. He put me down on the grass, and I asked him if he could cuddle me under the moonlight, surrounded by the sound of the waterfall. He did everything I said. We laid there and had a nice, deep talk. He asked me why I rejected him back in school, so I told him I had been stupid and obsessed with finding a rich guy, but now I realized I had made a big mistake by not choosing him. He believed every word I said. He hugged me tightly and started telling me how much he loves me. I started feeling kind of sorry for playing with his feelings like that, but at the same time, I was scared to death. And I couldn't let anyone get hurt in this situation, so at least we can all survive this way. I told him I was hungry, and he said that he would feed me as much as I want. He stood, swept me back up in his arms, and carried me to his room right in the middle of the wild. He cooked me spaghetti and some fried chicken, and after that, he put me to bed. His bed sheets smelled like old socks, but it made me more comfortable, and I don't know why. I was so tired, so I fell asleep right away. Then suddenly, I heard the door slam. I sat bolt upright to find James was gone. He must have gone out to find Lucas. It was dark and scary, and I didn't know what time it was. What if Lucas did not make it to the center? What if he was not far from where we were? I jumped out of bed and went out, screaming, in search of both of them. "James? Lucas? Lucas? Where are you? Lucas!" I screamed. Then I bumped into James. "You don't love him, huh? You think I'm a fool?" said James, coming out from behind a tree. "Where is he?" I cried helplessly. I saw how angry he was, and suddenly I realized that I had fallen into another one of his traps. I immediately started running, but my feet were bare, and I stepped on something sharp and fell, crying out in pain. "Be careful," James yelled, falling beside me on the ground and grabbing my foot. He massaged it, bound it with his shirt, and then hoisted me in his arms again, carrying me back to the waterfall. The sun started rising, and the view was beautiful. James sat there on the grass with his arms around me and said, "I wish we could stay like this forever." "Me too," I lied, tears running down my face, not knowing how and where Lucas was. "Here they are!" Lucas shouted from behind us. I pushed James and ran to Lucas. The police took James. We were taken to the hospital to see if we had any injuries. The doctor said they'll have to operate my foot because I stepped on a dirty, sharp rock that could get my foot infected. After the surgery was done, Lucas came into my room. "I'm so sorry," Lucas said. "I shouldn't have left you here with him. I'm so sorry." I explained to him that James hadn't hurt me and that he had actually been very gentle with me, and that it was my fault for throwing away my shoes and then running outside barefoot. Lucas and I went home, and James was taken to a mental hospital. No one had guessed how sick he was, which is how he got in such a great job as a safari guide. I hadn't recognized him myself, with his beard and mustache hiding his face. Lucas and I felt sorry for James, so we visited him from time to time, though he was never very happy to see Lucas. Over time, James began to get better, and Lucas and I began to heal from our traumatic experience in the wild. We got engaged and bought a house together, and then I got pregnant with a baby boy. One day, Lucas turned on the news and saw that a patient from the mental hospital attacked the guards and escaped. I joined him, staring at the TV in shock. I looked at the bottom of the screen and realized that it was the same hospital where James is. The footage of the escaped man was from a street camera. It was James. I didn't wish for anything bad to happen to James, but he was dangerous, and I was glad the police were searching for him. I really didn't wish him anything bad, but he's dangerous to my family. Now we live away from everyone and awaiting good news from the police. James has not been found yet, but we moved on and started our life all over with our newborn son.
Hi, I'm Dara, and my parents recently put my life in danger to serve their own needs. I didn't have the best upbringing. I live in a bad neighborhood, and my dad was always off doing shady deals with his friends, as he called them. Don't look at them, my mom told me if we were ever in the car when dad stopped to visit his friends. Don't ever talk to them. Sometimes, when my dad wanted to have his friends over, my mom would send me to my friend Kate's for sleepovers. I loved Kate's house. It was big and clean, with a beautiful yard and pool. Her parents were nice, and her dad always cooked good food. I wish I lived in a home like hers. And Kate was never snobby about having more money than me. She always made me feel like part of the family. Over the years, her home became my safe haven. The difference in our circumstances was clear, though. Like one day, we were looking for tape in her mom's desk, and we came across a large envelope stuffed full. It wasn't sealed, so I peeked inside. It was full of cash. "Oh yeah," Kate said. "That's the sunroom fund." "The what?" I asked. Kate said her parents wanted to build a sunroom onto the house. Every time they have spare cash, they put it in that envelope. They don't even count it or anything. My mom's just like, one day we'll open it up and be pleasantly surprised. I tried to act like that was cool, but inside, I was angry. My parents could barely afford rent, and Kate's family was going to add more to their already huge house. That night, I picked a fight with my parents. "Why do we live in a slum?" I demanded. "You both work. Why don't we have anything nice?" My mom called me ungrateful, and my dad said if I didn't like living here, I was free to leave, that I'd just be one less mouth to feed. Then they turned to fighting with each other, which they had been doing more lately. I went to bed, and a few minutes later, heard Mom leave the house. Where was she going at this hour? The next day, I came home to find Mom crying in the kitchen. "What's wrong?" I asked. She just shook her head. "Mom, please tell me." I thought she was still upset about what I said last night. But finally, she looked at me and said, "I'm in trouble." 1,000 fears raced through my mind. What kind of trouble? "I owe one of your dad's friends $800. I was shocked. She said she'd borrowed the money so she could buy a new dress and jewelry for a date. "A date?" I repeated, confused. "You mean with Dad?" She shook her head wearily. "I've been seeing someone else." At first, I was furious. All I could do was cry and ask why she cheated on Dad. But eventually I calmed down. My dad wasn't a very good person. It was easy to see why my mom would want to be with someone else. The most important thing was that she was in trouble, and I needed to help her. They said if I didn't come up with the money, they'd hurt me, hurt my family. I have about $500, but I can't get the rest, and I can't tell your dad. I didn't know what to do, so I just hugged her while she cried. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was scared Dad's friends would come to the house and hurt us. I wondered what I could do. I had a part-time job, but the money I made there wasn't enough to help my mom. Still, I'd give her everything I could. The next day, I went to Kate's after school. We tried to have our usual fun, but she said I seemed down, asked what was wrong. I promised my mom I wouldn't breathe a word to anybody, so I said nothing. Later, she went to the bathroom, and suddenly I remembered the envelope in her mom's desk, the sunroom fund. I pushed the thought away, but it kept coming back. They don't need a sunroom, I told myself. Why should they get things they don't even need, when my family can barely afford things we do need? Before I could think, I was reaching in the drawer. I grabbed several 20s from the envelope and stuffed them in my pocket. Then I put the envelope back. I tried to eat some of Kate's dad's delicious dinner that night, but I felt too queasy and returned home. When I arrived, I gave the money to Mom. Here, I made this in tips at work. I lied. It was only $80. I needed to find a way to get more. I wanted to ask my mom why her new boyfriend couldn't lend her the money, since he'd gotten her into this mess. Instead, I promised her I'd get more money tomorrow. All night I tossed and turned. How could I have done this to Kate and her family when they'd been so good to me? I just kept reminding myself that they didn't really need the money, that they'd done nothing to deserve the money. The next day, I came home from school to find my mom scrubbing red stuff off her car. Someone had painted a giant bullseye on the side. "Help me," she ordered, "before your father sees." I grabbed a rag and started helping. As we worked, a car drove by slowly. "Get down!" My mom pushed me behind her. I crouched, my heart pounding. I felt sick with terror. Were we about to be attacked right here in front of our house? But the car finally passed by. "We need that money," my mom said. "Now." So I went to Kate's and waited for my opportunity. When her mom called her away to help with something, I opened the envelope and counted out $220 I still needed. That night, I gave the money to my mom. She hugged me and told me I was a wonderful daughter. She didn't even ask how I got the money. Why was I suddenly making so much in tips for a job that barely paid anything most days? I spent another sleepless night. The next day, Kate seemed down. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "My parents think someone stole money from the sunroom fund." I froze, terrified. I knew she was going to accuse me, and I wouldn't be able to deny it. She'd hate me forever. I'd never be able to go back to her beautiful, safe home. And I'd probably go to jail. "They think it's my brother's friend Kelsey," she went on. "That kid's bad news." I stared in shock. They didn't suspect me. I was off the hook. Except now, what if they accused Kelsey? What if he got in trouble? When I went home that day, I was a wreck. And it didn't help that I arrived to find my parents in the middle of a screaming match. My dad had found out about the loan my mom had gotten from his friends and all about her affair. He accused her of doing terrible things to earn the money to pay back the loan. Just wanting it to stop, I jumped in the middle. "I stole the money from Kate," I said. They both stopped shouting and looked at me. "Her family has an envelope where they're saving cash. I'm going to pay it back, I swear. I just didn't know what else to do." Dad looked at Mom and said he was disgusted that she'd gotten me involved. He shoved the stolen cash at me and said to give it back to Kate's family. He said they'd find another way to pay back his friends. Then he stormed out. Mom sat down at the table and cried. Knowing what I had to do now, I went to Kate's, gave her back the money, and told her everything. "Do you hate me now?" I asked. "I don't know what to say," she said. "I'll talk to you when I'm ready." I never expected to hear from her again, but the next day, she invited me over. Her family was all sitting around the table. I could barely face them, but her mom handed me an envelope. "This is a loan," she said, "to get your mom out of debt. You can take whatever time you need to pay it back." I was shocked. I asked why they were doing this. Kate said, "I wish you told me you were in trouble. I thought we were friends."